The rotten egg gas, hydrogen sulfide, is one of the main malodorous compounds in human flatus. In other words, one of the main reasons farts can smell so bad. But the larger concern is it may be responsible for relapses of ulcerative colitis. Previously, I talked about the role animal protein may play in the development of inflammatory bowel disease, thought to be because of the putrefying animal protein gas. But what if you already have ulcerative colitis? Can cutting down on sulfur-containing amino acids help? Before this study was published, the only thing shown really to help was the withdrawal of milk. Case reports going back decades describe patients with ulcerative colitis whose flares appeared to be triggered by cow's milk. And the elimination of all dairy products from the diet was reported to frequently result in dramatic improvements in symptoms. But when milk was reintroduced back into their diets, it could trigger an attack. It wasn't formally studied, though, until 1965. Was it just a small group of patients who were maybe allergic or something, or could a milk-free diet help with the disease in general? So they randomized patients presenting with an attack of ulcerative colitis into a milk-free diet, or a controlled placebo dummy diet, where they told people just not to eat a bunch of random things to make it seem like they were getting special treatment. The milk-free diet worked better. Twice as many were symptom-free off of all dairy, and fewer patients suffered relapses. So there seems to be a certain proportion of ulcerative colitis patients that would benefit from eliminating all dairy. They estimate that milk is a trigger in about 1 in every 5, so certainly sufferers should try a dairy-free diet trial to see if they're one of the lucky ones that can be controlled with such a simple dietary intervention. OK, but what about cutting back on sulfur-containing amino acids in general? This study of 4 ulcerative colitis sufferers found that their daily bouts of bloody diarrhea significantly lessened. So reduced intake of sulfur-containing amino acids, or sulfur-containing amino acid-rich foods, produced an improvement in moderately severe ulcerative colitis. What happened when they added these foods back? The researchers felt that the effect was so dramatic that challenging back with foods like meat, dairy, eggs, and sulfited wine was considered unethical. This is just a pilot study, though. Researchers then set up a study in which 191 ulcerative colitis patients in remission were followed for a year along with their diets to determine which foods were associated with a relapse. They turned out to be meat and alcohol. This makes sense because they're both can be rich sources of sulfur, which may increase the concentration of hydrogen sulfide, which, if you remember, is toxic because it interferes with our body's utilization of fiber, which our good bacteria turn into this beneficial compound called butyrate. So how can we increase fecal butyrate levels to counteract any hydrogen sulfide? Well, butyrate enemas have been shown to be of benefit, but if it's formed from fiber, can't we just get it coming in the regular way? Yes. Ulcerative colitis sufferers were given oat bran for 3 months, making their good bacteria happy. None of them relapsed, and their symptoms appeared to be under better control. One of the common questions we physicians treating patients with IBD, inflammatory bowel disease, are often asked is whether changing diet could positively affect the course of their disease. So far, our answer, especially for ulcerative colitis, has been, we don't know, no special recommendations. This may now change, though, with this study that suggests that the consumption of meat may aggravate the course of inflammatory bowel disease. So folks may want to cut down on meat, meaning like no more than once a week. We don't have confirmation from interventional studies to support the specifics, but that could be considered like the best available evidence we have right now. For decades, a sometimes furious battle has raged among scientists over the extent to which elevated salt consumption contributes to death, with one camp calling it a public health hazard that requires vigorous attack, and another claiming the risks of dietary salt excess are exaggerated, even to the point of calling salt reduction probably the largest delusion in the history of preventive medicine. The other side calls this denialism ethically irresponsible, especially when millions of lives are at stake every year. To describe two sides of the debate may be falling into the trap of false equivalency, though. As the superhero-sounding World Hypertension League points out, there's strong scientific consensus that reducing salt saves lives, and like the climate change debate, most authorities are on one side, with only the industry affected and their paid consultants and a few dissenting scientists on the other. Nearly all government-appointed bodies and nutrition experts who have considered the evidence have recommended we collectively cut our salt intake about in half, described as extreme, though, by those defending the industry. After all, just a small fraction of Americans actually get their sodium intake that low. Therefore, the salt skeptics say, the human experience for very low levels of sodium consumption is extremely sparse. Extremely sparse? The reality is the exact opposite. The human experience is living for millions upon millions of years without Cheetos or a salt shaker in sight. We evolved to be salt-conserving machines, and when we're plunked down into snack food in KFC country, we develop high blood pressure. But in the few populations left that don't eat salt, that continue to eat as much as we have for millions of years, our leading killer risk factor, hypertension, is practically non-existent. And when you take people with out-of-control hypertension and bring them back down to the sodium levels we were designed to eat, the ravages of the disease can even be reversed. So why is there still a debate? If salt hidden in foods kills millions of people around the world, why are efforts to cut dietary salt being met with fierce resistance? Well, salt is big business for the processed food and meat industry, and so, according to the head of the World Health Organization's Collaborating Center on Nutrition, we get the familiar story. Just like the tobacco industry spent decades trying to manufacture doubt and confuse the public, the salt industry does the same. But the controversy is fake. The evidence for salt reduction is clear and consistent. Most of the quote-unquote contradictory research comes from scientists linked to the salt industry. However, it takes skill to spot the subterfuge, because the industry is smart enough to stay behind the scenes, covertly paying for studies designed to downplay the risks. All they have to do is manufacture just enough doubt to keep the controversy alive. The likes of the World Hypertension League have been described as a mere pop gun against the weapons-grade firepower of salt-encrusted industries, who look disdainfully at the do-gooder health associations who erect roadblocks on the path to profits. Lest we forget, notes this editorial in the Journal of the Canadian Medical Association, high blood pressure is big business for the drug industry too, whose blood pressure billions might be threatened should we cut back on salt. If we went sodium-free and eliminated the scourge of hypertension, not only would Big Pharma suffer, what about doctors? The #1 diagnosis adults see doctors with is high blood pressure. Nearly 40 million doctor visits a year. And so maybe even the BMW industry might be benefiting from keeping the salt debate alive. Millions suffer from Alzheimer's disease, and the available and foreseeable treatments are disappointing at best. Given the absence of disease-modifying treatments, there's been growing interest in effective strategies for the prevention of the disease in the first place. Even if we're able to just delay the onset by as little as 1 year, we could potentially prevent more than 9 million cases over the next 40 years. Once cognitive functions are lost in Alzheimer's disease patients, they may be lost forever. Consequently, prevention, rather than a cure for Alzheimer's disease, appears a more realistic strategy to offset the catastrophic impact of this dementia. Considerable evidence now indicates that Alzheimer's disease is primarily a vascular disorder, based on a number of lines of evidence that point towards impaired circulation of blood to the brain. Vascular risk factors, such as high cholesterol, can be thought of as a ticking time bomb to Alzheimer's disease. What's bad for the heart may be bad for the mind. Traditionally, there have been two competing theories for the cause of Alzheimer's: the amyloid cascade model that implicates the buildup of amyloid plaques within the brain, and the vascular model that argues that it's the lack of adequate blood flow to the brain due to atherosclerosis. We now realize they are not mutually exclusive, and that arterial disease can set up a vicious cycle in which atherosclerotic plaques in the arteries may contribute to Alzheimer's plaques in the brain. Although at times portrayed as tantamount to poison, cholesterol is an essential structural component of all our cells. That's why our body makes it. But if there's too much, it can become a major factor contributing to various diseases, including coronary artery disease, stroke, and neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's. Too much cholesterol in our blood is unanimously recognized to be a risk factor for the development of Alzheimer's disease, and cholesterol may play an active role in the progression of Alzheimer's as well. Autopsy studies have found that Alzheimer's brains have significantly more cholesterol than normal brains, and it specifically appears to accumulate in the Alzheimer brain plaques. But we used to think the pool of cholesterol in the brain was separate from the pool we had in our blood, but there is now growing evidence to the contrary. For example, LDL may be able to cross the blood-brain barrier into the brain, so a high-fat diet may not only increase cholesterol levels in the blood, but also the influx of cholesterol into the central nervous system. In addition, having high cholesterol may even damage the blood-brain barrier itself, and allow for even more cholesterol to flow into the brain, providing the missing link between high cholesterol and Alzheimer's. Individuals with high cholesterol levels at midlife have a higher risk of going on to develop Alzheimer's disease. A cholesterol over 250 could potentially triple the odds of Alzheimer's. And now we have high-tech PET scanning of the brain that can directly correlate the amount of so-called bad cholesterol in our blood with the amount of amyloid buildup in our brain. You can do it right in a Petri dish. Adding cholesterol makes them churn out more amyloid that makes up Alzheimer plaques, whereas removing cholesterol can decrease the level of amyloid released from cells. In addition, amyloid degradation is less efficient. Clearing amyloid is less efficient in a high cholesterol environment. Cholesterol can then help seed the clumping of the amyloid. Using an electron microscope, you can see the clustering of amyloid fibers on and around little microcrystals of cholesterol. Once in the brain, cholesterol can also undergo autooxidation, causing the formation of highly toxic free radicals. So having high cholesterol levels in the blood is thought to increase the risk of dementia, not only by inducing atherosclerosis and impairing blood flow, but may directly affect the neurodegeneration within the brain. In conclusion, excess dietary cholesterol could in principle contribute to the development of Alzheimer's disease, and the evidence linking high cholesterol to Alzheimer's appears to be steadily mounting. Of course, some of this work was paid for by drug companies hoping to capitalize on Alzheimer's with cholesterol-lowering statin drugs. Ironic, since statins themselves can cause cognitive impairment. Though rare, statin side effects may include short and long-term memory loss, behavioral changes, impaired concentration and attention, paranoia, anxiety, as early as 5 days after starting the drugs, but sometimes even months later, though folks should recover within a month of stopping the drugs. A better strategy, then, may be to change the lifestyle factors that lead to the high cholesterol in the first place, particularly reducing saturated fat from the diet. But it's not enough for us to just tell our individual patients. Systematic implementation of education campaigns promoting radical changes in cultural and societal values may be necessary to adopt Alzheimer's defeating strategies by patients in a broader sense, and such actions may provide potentially huge dividends by preventing both cardiovascular disease and dementia, two of our leading causes of death. It is well known that deficiencies in certain vitamins and minerals can lead to significant impairment of immune function and an increased susceptibility to infection, which can be reversed by supplementation in deficient individuals. However, it is unclear to what extent supplementation may aid in maintaining an optimal balance within the immune system in adequately nourished individuals. So researchers in New Zealand tried supplementing with kiwi fruit. In a Petri dish, gold kiwi fruit puree appeared to boost natural killer cell activity in human blood and boost the response to a tetanus vaccine. But does what happens in a petri dish happen in people? There was a study in which 2 immune-related sets of genes were found to be upregulated by eating 3 kiwi fruit a day, but does this translate into actual helping us fight off infection? We didn't know until this study. Researchers in New Zealand found that the consumption of gold kiwi fruit reduces the severity and duration of certain upper respiratory tract infections symptoms. Why study gold kiwi fruits? Because the study was funded by the company that owns the patent to gold kiwi fruits. A few dozen elderly individuals were randomized to 1 or 2 groups, eating 2 bananas a day or eating 4 kiwi fruit a day for a month, and then they switched. The next month, the banana group ate kiwis, and the kiwi fruit group ate bananas. The rationale for providing bananas as kind of like the placebo was to provide an alternative fruit that had relatively similar calories, but lower nutritional value. The purpose of the study was to determine whether regular consumption of gold kiwi fruit reduces the incidence, duration, and severity of symptoms of upper respiratory tract infections like the common cold in comparison to bananas. They found no reduction in overall incidence, but those that did get sick during the kiwi fruit phase had significantly reduced severity and duration of head congestion and the duration of sore throat. And not just by a little. The sick banana eaters suffered for 5 days with a sore throat and congestion, compared to the kiwi fruit eaters, who felt better after just a day or 2. That's significant. The reason they studied older individuals is that they tend to be more susceptible to respiratory infections. Small children are another at-risk group, averaging twice as many upper respiratory tract infections as adults, 4 to 6 a year. So, 66 preschoolers were randomized into the same 2 groups, kiwi fruit versus bananas. And not only were there, again, significant improvements in the symptoms of those who got sick while on kiwi fruit, fewer got sick in the first place, 45% lower odds of a cold or flu-like illness, which means that the children eating kiwis had almost a 50% reduction in the chance of having a cold or flu. This suggests that kiwi fruit consumption may be a daily prescription for health, though about 1 in 150 children report being allergic to kiwi fruit, which ranks them number 3 after milk and eggs, and above peanuts in a survey of 3,500 kids as the most common food allergies, and so are not for everyone. What if we don't want just low risk for heart attack, but no risk? One great stumbling block has been that government and national health organizations appear to have taken the patronizing view that the public can't handle the truth, and would rather this science be watered down. But as Dr. Esselstyn wrote in the Cleveland Clinic Journal of Medicine, in cholesterol lowering, moderation kills. Even if all Americans kept their total cholesterol below 200, millions would develop coronary artery disease. Strong evidence showed we need to keep our total cholesterol under 150 to stem America's epidemic of coronary artery disease, our #1 killer. What kind of evidence? Well, in many cultures, coronary artery disease is practically unheard of when the total serum cholesterol levels are under 150. And here in the U.S., in the famous Framingham Heart Study, few of those with levels under 150 developed heart disease, and none died of it. Here's data from the 26-year follow-up of the Framingham Heart Study, the cholesterol levels of people that get heart attacks, and the cholesterol levels of those that don't. Because we now know that 35% of heart attacks occur in people with total cholesterol levels between 150 and 200, a target level of only 200 guarantees that millions of U.S. citizens will perish of coronary disease. We cannot continue to have public and private organizations on the forefront of health leadership recommend to the public a dietary plan that guarantees that millions will perish from the very disease the guidelines were supposed to prevent. With its lack of fiber and antioxidants, its emphasis on animal protein, fat, and extreme free radical production, the U.S. diet is largely responsible for our bitter harvest of chronic diseases. If the coronary artery disease epidemic is seen as a raging fire, and cholesterol and fats are the fuels, the American Heart Association has merely recommended cutting the flow of fuel. The only tenable solution is to cut the fuel supply altogether, by reducing cholesterol levels to those proven to prevent coronary disease. Why is there reticence to provide the public with guidelines that will spare them heart disease or its progression? The National Research Council position was that a dietary fat recommendation lower than 30% would be too frustrating for those attempting to achieve a significant reduction. Although it's uncertain to what extent people will adopt the advice, it's nevertheless scientifically and ethically imperative to inform the public what constitutes an optimal diet. We must tell the public the truth about what's best for health, and let them decide their degree of compliance. When a panel of experts was challenged to answer the question, what do you tell the patient who says, "I'll do anything, but I never want to have heart disease," or "I've had a heart attack and I never want to have another, period"? Answers ranged from "have them eat beans, and more beans," to "it was time for the public to embrace a plant-based diet." This is not vegetarianism. Vegetarians often consume all sorts of junk, vegans too, for that matter. This new paradigm is exclusively plant-based nutrition, whole plant foods. Why exclusively? Because, as reported in the Cornell China study, there does not appear to be a threshold beyond which further benefits did not accrue with increasing proportions of plant foods in the diet. It appears the more plant-based foods and the fewer animal-based foods, the better. Now, Esselstyn is acutely aware of the castigation that accompanies recommending a plant-based diet, namely that the recommendation will be met with skepticism and a hostility on the part of the general public, though less so these days, as millions jump on the plant-based wagon. But that hostility is peculiar, because many cultures sustain themselves with such a diet, enjoying its taste, texture, and variety, as well as its health-promoting qualities. However, dietary preference is deeply personal, and one can easily be offended. Nevertheless, the public has the right to know the truth, as understood by experts in nutritive biology, about what constitutes the safest and healthiest diet. Some criticize this exclusively plant-based diet as extreme or draconian. Webster's dictionary describes draconian as inhumanly cruel, as a closer look reveals that extreme or inhumanly cruel describes not plant-based nutrition, but the consequences of our present Western diet. Having a breastbone sawed in half for bypass surgery, or a stroke that renders one an invalid unable to speak, can be construed as extreme, and having a breast, prostate, colon, or rectum removed to treat cancer may seem inhumanly cruel. That's extreme. Eating a bean burrito is easy. The heart of a traditional Mediterranean diet, mainly vegetarian, much lower in meat and dairy, and uses fruit for dessert, so no surprise those eating that way had very low heart disease rates compared to those eating standard Western diets. This landmark study, though, has been cited to suggest that all types of fat, animal or vegetable, was associated with the appearance of new atherosclerotic lesions in our coronary arteries feeding our hearts. About 100 men were given angiograms at baseline, then 2 years later looking for the development of lesions like this, before and after, all the while monitoring their diets every year. Only about 1 in 20 eating lower-fat diets had new lesions, compared to about 8 in 20 on more typical American diets, around 33% or more fat. When they drilled down, though, only 3 types of fat appeared significantly to increase the likelihood of the appearance of new lesions: lauric, oleic, and linoleic. Lauric acid is a saturated fat found in coconut oil and palm kernel oil, which is found in junk food, whipped cream, candy bars. Oleic, from the Latin word oleum for olive oil, but that's not where these men were getting their oleic acid from. The top sources for Americans are basically cake, chicken, and pork, and linoleic comes mostly from chicken. So the study really just showed that people eating lots of junk, chicken, and pork tended to close off their coronary arteries. To see if major sources of plant fats, like olive oil or nuts, help or hurt, Ideally, we do a multi-year randomized study. We take thousands of people and have a third eat nuts, a third eat more olive oil, and a third do essentially nothing to see who does better. And that's exactly what was done. The PREDIMED study took thousands of people at high risk for heart disease in Spain, who were already eating a Mediterranean-ish diet, and randomized them into 3 groups for a couple years, one with added extra virgin olive oil, one with added nuts, and a third group that was told to cut down on fat, but they didn't, so basically ended up as a no dietary changes control group. What happened to the amount of plaque in their arteries over time? Whereas there was significant worsening of carotid artery thickening and plaque in the no dietary change control group, those in the added nuts group showed a significant reversal in thickening and an arrest in plaque progression. There were no significant changes in the added olive oil group. The richness of the plant-based Mediterranean diet, potentially beneficial foods such as fruits, vegetables, beans, nuts, whole grains, and olive oil, believed to explain its cardioprotective effects, these results suggest that nuts really are a preferable source of fat to olive oil, and may delay the progression of atherosclerosis, the harbinger of future cardiovascular events such as stroke. Adding nuts appeared to cut the risk of stroke in half. Note, though, they were still having strokes. Half as many strokes, so the nuts appeared to be helping, but they were still eating a diet conducive to strokes and heart attacks. All 3 groups had basically the same heart attack rates, the same overall death rates. That's what Dr. Ornish noted when he wrote in, "No significant reduction in the rates of heart attack, death from cardiovascular causes, or death from any cause, just that stroke benefit." But hey, that's something. A Mediterranean diet is certainly better than what most people are consuming, but even better may be a diet based on whole plant foods, shown to reverse heart disease, not contribute to it. The authors of the study replied that they didn't wish to detract from Ornish's work, noting that Mediterranean and plant-based diets actually share a great number of foods in common. Yes, Ornish's diet may reverse heart disease, but the Mediterranean diet proponents argue the major problem with Ornish's diet is that it doesn't taste good, and so hardly anyone sticks to it. The study I explored about how listening to Mozart can reduce allergic reactions reminded me of a similar study on humor. Take a bunch of people with dust mite allergies, half watched Charlie Chaplin, half watched the Weather Channel, then they injected them with dust mite poop, and the allergic response was significantly reduced after viewing the humorous video for a matter of hours, suggesting that the induction of laughter may play some role in alleviating allergic diseases. But might it suppress our immune system too much? No. Have people watch a comedian for an hour, and their natural killer cell activity goes up compared to watching nothing, and their white blood count goes up, the number of immune cells in their bloodstream. The level of immune-boosting interferon goes up and stays up the next day, and the same with antibody production, pumping out more antibodies because yesterday you saw some video. So humor seems to offer the best of both worlds, at preventing the overreactive allergic response while boosting immune protection. But you actually have to laugh. The more you laugh, the better your natural killer cell activity gets, but exposure to a humorous video alone did not significantly affect immune function. Those that didn't laugh, maybe because it was a Bill Cosby video, did not benefit, reinforcing that it's not the funny video that improves immune function, but our laughter in response. Because of the role natural killer cells play in viral illness and various types of cancer, the ability to significantly increase their activity in a brief period of time using a non-invasive method could be clinically important the next time you have a cold or cancer. Laughter, like music or healthy food, offers potential benefits without any risk, or almost any risk. You've heard of side-splitting laughter, 67-year-old woman attending laughter therapy sessions, and evidently rapture led to rupture. Thankfully, you can't actually laugh your head off, but you can laugh until you wet yourself. It's called giggle incontinence in the medical literature, actually quite common in women and no laughing matter. So the next time you're in the theater, should you choose the comedy over a tearjerker given the benefits of humor? Not necessarily. If you take people with a latex allergy and have them watch a weather video versus a heartwarming drama, viewing the weather information video did not cause emotion with tears, I should hope not, and it failed to modulate allergic responses. The tearjerker, however, successfully reduced the allergic response, but only in those whose tears were actually jerked. So to improve allergies, laughing works, crying works. I laughed, I cried, it was better than cats, especially if you have a cat allergy. Anything else you can do? Kissing. There's actually a whole science of kissing, which sounds a pleasant enough college major until you realize it's about all the diseases you can get. But if you take people with seasonal pollen allergies or dust mite allergies, and have them kiss someone in a room for 30 minutes, they have a significant reduction in their allergic reactions for both the pollen and the dust mites, whereas if you just have them hug for a half hour instead, no benefit. Bottom line, kissing significantly reduced allergic responses in patients with both allergic rhinitis, runny nose, itchy eyes, or allergic dermatitis, like a rash. Collectively, these findings indicate that the direct action of love may be beneficial, though evidently cuddling wasn't quite direct enough. With all the side effects of antihistamine allergy drugs, you'd think it'd be easy to get people to sign up for the study, but this was done in Japan, where evidently they do not kiss habitually. The follow-up study, which found similar benefit for an action of love that was even more direct, was also performed by researchers for whom English may not have been their primary language, as evidenced by their speculation about females having more organisms. The latest dietary guidelines, the 2015 guidelines won't be out probably until January 2016, have a chapter on food components to reduce, but when they say things like reduce intake of solid fats, major sources of saturated and trans fatty acids, what does that mean in terms of which foods to reduce? Similarly, there's a chapter on nutrients we should increase our intake of, so-called shortfall nutrients, but when they say we need more magnesium, for example, what does that mean in terms of actual food? Let's look at 20 different types of foods to see, based on the federal guideline criteria, which foods are the healthiest and which foods are the least healthy. To illustrate, I'll use traffic light labeling like the UK signpost system, which assigns colors for like green meaning go, yellow or amber meaning caution, and red meaning stop, and think before you put it in your mouth. Added sugars is easy. Anyone could have guessed sweets and soda, but there's often surprising levels even in savory snack foods, like Ritz crackers, which I'm using as my snack example. The top 5 offenders are basically soda, donuts, Kool-Aid, ice cream, and candy. Next is caloric density, calories per serving, where oils join dessert and processed snack foods as the worst, though one cannot consider eggs, fish, nuts and seeds, poultry, other meat, or soda to be low-calorie foods. The top 5 sources of calories in the American diet are basically desserts, bread, chicken, soda, and pizza. Can you guess where cholesterol is found? Desserts, dairy, eggs, fish, chicken, and other meat. Number 1 by far is eggs, but then chicken contributes more cholesterol to the American diet than beef, then cheese and pork. Here are the foods high in saturated fat, coming from dairy, dairy donuts, dairy chicken. Salt levels, highest in lunch meat and snack foods, but Americans get most of their sodium from bread, chicken, and pizza. About half of our food groups here have trans fats, either naturally or artificially added or created. Cakes, cookies, crackers, pies, and donuts, number 1, then animal products, margarine, French fries, chips, and microwave popcorn. Now to the nutrients. Green is a high source, pale green is a medium source, and white is a poor source for calcium, fiber, magnesium, potassium, vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin D, vitamin E, and vitamin K. Okay, I know that was a little fast. Let's put it all together. Okay, now this is nutrients per typically 100 grams, about 3.5 ounces. But that's not how our body keeps track of what we eat. The body's food currency is in calories, not grams. Our body monitors how much energy we eat, not how much weight we eat, weight of food. We only have about 2,000 calories in the calorie bank to spend every day, so to maximize our nutrient purchase, we want to eat the most nutrient-dense food. So I just changed this from nutrients per weight to nutrients per calorie. The foods are just listed here in alphabetical order to look for trends, so we can kind of rank them based on these scores from best to worst. So the foods to emphasize in one's diet are unprocessed, unrefined, plant-based foods, which in general lack the disease-promoting components, and, as the Dietary Guidelines Committee put it, these foods contain not only the essential vitamins and minerals, but also hundreds of naturally occurring phytonutrients that may protect against cancer, heart disease, osteoporosis, and other chronic health conditions. So this chart actually extends far to the right, hundreds of additional bright green columns capturing all the phytonutrients found in whole plant foods, but largely missing from processed and animal-derived foods. There would just be hundreds more white columns here in the middle, with a few green tiles far off at the end. And the lack of disease-preventing compounds may be compounded by the presence of disease-promoting compounds. So that's why people eating more plant-based tend to end up eating a more nutrient-dense dietary pattern, closer to the current federal dietary guidelines. And the more plant-based we get, apparently, the better. In 2013 was a bad year for fish oil. Claims were crushed that the long-chain omega-3s in fish oil, EPA and DHA, would stop the progression of heart disease, and then DHA was associated with increased risk of prostate cancer, and monumentally failed to treat macular degeneration. This over-the-top rhetoric sounded a little suspicious, and indeed, the paper was retracted, because the author sells some rival supplement that he failed to disclose. But he does have a point. I covered the fish oil failure for heart disease. What about the increased cancer risk? Men with the highest circulating levels in their blood of the long-chain omega-3 fat DHA were found to be at higher risk for prostate cancer, though a subsequent compilation of all such studies suggested EPA, the other major long-chain omega-3 in fish and fish oil, may be more closely associated with increased cancer risk. Either way, these long-chain omega-3s have been promoted for prevention of heart disease and cancer. But now that we know that not only does there appear to be no benefit for death, heart attack, or stroke, but there may be an elevation in cancer risk, the general recommendation to increase the intake of these fats should consider its potential risks. How could eating more fish or fish oil increase cancer risk? Well, there are some industrial pollutants like PCBs linked to increased prostate cancer risk. And the primary source of exposure in the general population is believed to be through diet from fish, meat, and dairy products. If you do a supermarket survey, the PCBs, shown in white here, are highest in freshwater fish and lowest in vegans. Cannibals take note. No, that's just how they label the market basket of plant foods, though vegans have been tested and were found to be significantly less polluted, including the PCB specifically linked to prostate cancer. But this study here was done in North America, where people don't eat a lot of fish, and indeed even the group with the highest DHA levels weren't that high. And so maybe the confounding factor was meat consumption in general, not just fish, and that lower meat consumption may be the reason for the lower rates of prostate cancer in the lower DHA group, as the consumption of well-done meat is associated with an increased risk of prostate cancer, and intake should be restricted. We also used to think omega-3s could protect us from arrhythmias, abnormal heart rhythms like atrial fibrillation. Millions suffer from the condition, which causes an irregular heartbeat and a higher risk of stroke and death. but fish and fish oil consumption does not appear effective for preventing it or treating it. Other arrhythmias can be life-threatening and cause sudden death. Despite initial encouraging results, more recent studies have not only failed to reduce sudden cardiac death with omega-3s, but actually increased mortality in cardiac patients. For example, men with heart disease advised to eat more oily fish or supplied with fish oil capsules were found to have higher risk of cardiac death, maybe because of the contaminants in fish such as mercury. In either case, given the inconsistent benefits, the potential adverse effects, omega-3s must be prescribed with caution, and generalized recommendation to increase fish intake or to take fish oil capsules needs to be reconsidered. What is the optimal timing and dose of nitrate-containing vegetables? In terms of timing for improving athletic performance, everyone's different, so basically 2 or 3 hours before competition is about as specific as we can get. How much borscht do we have to have for breakfast? To date, most studies have used a narrow range of doses, so it's not clear if it's a matter of more the better, or if there's a ceiling or a threshold amount, so they put it to the test. Set up folks on an exercise bike, had them furiously cycle until they dropped. They made it about 8 minutes after drinking a placebo, and after 1 shot of beetroot juice, about 1/4 cup. They may or may not have gained themselves a few seconds, but drinking a half cup gave them like an extra minute. But drinking even more didn't seem to offer additional benefit. That half cup or so of beet juice corresponds to 8 units of nitrate. So 4 didn't significantly work, and 16 did no better than 8, so 8 appears to be the sweet spot for improving athletic performance. What about for lowering blood pressure? Same thing, 4 units, the triangles, may have helped a little, but 8 worked better, and about equally as well as 16. A 10-point drop in blood pressure may not sound like a lot, but may translate into dropping heart attack risk 25% and stroke risk 35%. But look, beet juice is perishable and hard to find. What about V8 juice, which has both beet and spinach juice? Must not have a lot, because you'd have to drink 19 quarts a day to hit the target. Straight beet juice is nitrate-packed, but it's a processed food. How many actual beets or green leafy vegetables would one have to eat to reach the target of 8 units? The British Heart Foundation put together this really helpful table that takes into account both nitrate concentration and serving size. So a serving of anything in the high group is worth 2 units, a serving of medium group vegetables about a half, and low nitrate vegetables about a 1/10. Now, these are really kind of pretty small servings, less than 3 ounces. Remember, we're trying to get up to 8 a day, so a typical 15-ounce can of beets would nail the 8-unit target for the day, as would a really big salad of greens. Most people only get about a unit a day, but even vegetarians need to double their vegetable intake, and those eating organic may have to eat even more. Organic produce may have more vitamin C, iron, magnesium, phosphorus, but tends to have fewer nitrates, since by law synthetic nitrogen fertilizers are banned from organic agriculture. Now, eating 15% more organic veggies to get the same nitrate intake is easy, but for beets the spread can be larger. On the other hand, organic beets may have more of certain phytonutrients, like the red pigment, which may explain why organic beet extracts had significantly higher anti-cancer effects in vitro compared to conventional beets. Between 1990 and 2010, some of our leading causes of death and disability haven't changed. Heart disease was the leading cause of loss of life and health then, and remains the leading cause today. Some things got better, like HIV/AIDS, but others got worse, like chronic kidney disease, a doubling in the tens of thousands of deaths and the hundreds of thousands whose kidneys fail completely, requiring kidney transplants or lifelong dialysis. And about 1 in 8 of us now have chronic kidney disease, whether we know it or not, and most of those with chronic kidney disease don't know it. About 3/4 of the millions affected are unaware their kidneys are starting to fail, which is particularly worrisome given that early identification provides an opportunity to slow the progression and alter the course of disease. So what can we do about it? The Western-style diet is a major risk factor for impaired kidney function and chronic kidney disease, also known as the meat-sweet diet or standard American diet, causing an impairment of kidney blood flow, inflammation, and subsequent leakage of protein in the urine, and a rapid decrease in kidney function. Table sugar and high-fructose corn syrup is associated with increased blood pressure and uric acid levels that can both damage the kidney, and saturated fat, trans fat, and cholesterol found in animal fat and junk food negatively impact kidney function as well. The consumption of animal fat can actually alter the structure of the kidney, and the animal protein can deliver an acid load to the kidneys, increase ammonia production, and damage the sensitive kidney cells. That's why restricting protein intake is recommended for preventing kidney function decline, though it may be animal protein in particular, not just protein in general, so the source of the protein, plant versus animal, may be more important than the amount regarding adverse health consequences. Animal protein intake has a profound effect on normal human kidney function, inducing what's called hyperfiltration, increasing the workload of the kidney. This may help explain why our kidneys fail so often. Unlimited intake of protein-rich foods, now generally regarded as normal, may be responsible for dramatic differences in kidney function between modern human beings and their remote predecessors, who hunted and scavenged for meat here and there. Sustained, rather than intermittent excesses of protein, requires us to call on our kidney reserves continuously, causing a kind of unrelenting stress on our kidneys that can predispose even healthy people to progressive kidney scarring and deterioration of kidney function. It's like always revving our engine into the red. On the other hand, administration of an equal quantity of vegetable protein does not appear to have the same effects. Eating meat, for example, increases the workload on the kidneys within hours of consumption, but apparently taking care of plant protein appears to be a cinch. This was done with beef, but any animal protein will do. Eat a meal of tuna fish, and you can see the increased pressure on the kidneys go up, again, within just hours, for both non-diabetics with normal kidneys and diabetics with normal kidneys. If instead of having a tuna salad sandwich, you had a tofu salad sandwich with the same amount of protein, no effect. And same thing happens with eggs and dairy protein, both in people with normal and diseased kidneys. Short-term studies have indicated that substituting plant proteins like soy for animal protein is associated with less hyperfiltration and protein leakage, therefore slowing deterioration of kidney function. However, the long-term effect has not been adequately studied until this study was published in 2014. A 6-month, double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trial, soy versus dairy protein, and the consumption of whole soy tended to preserve renal function and kidney function, compared with milk in individuals with lowered renal function. Similar results were reported in diabetics. Even just giving isolated soy protein appeared to make things better compared to dairy protein, which made things worse. Once one's kidneys have deteriorated to the point where they're actively losing protein in the urine, a plant-based diet may help turn it off and on like a light switch. Here's protein leakage on a standard low-sodium diet, switched to a supplemented vegan diet: low sodium, vegan, low sodium, vegan. What is going on? Why does animal protein cause that overload reaction, but not plant protein? It appears to be an inflammatory response triggered by the animal protein. We know this because administration of a powerful anti-inflammatory drug abolishes the hyperfiltration, protein leakage response to meat ingestion. Here's the typical kidney stress response to a meat meal, but here's with the anti-inflammatory drug on board, confirming the role of inflammation in the impact of animal protein on our kidneys. Recently, it's become apparent that our DNA does not tell the whole story of our individuality, and other factors environmental factors play an important role in human health and disease, thanks to two revolutions in biology. First, there was epigenetics, where diet and lifestyle changes have been shown to turn genes on and off. And the second, our unfolding understanding of our microbiome, how changes in our gut flora appear to impact greatly on human biology. Until relatively recently, the colon was viewed as a retention tank for waste, and water absorption was its big biological function. The problem was it was hard to get in there, and we weren't able to grow most of the bugs in a lab. As many as 99% of all microbes fail to grow under standard laboratory conditions, and so how do you study something you can't study? But now we have fancy genetic techniques. It took 13 years to sequence the DNA of the first bacteria ever. These days, the same feat might only take 2 hours. And what we learned is that we can each be thought of as a superorganism, a kind of human microbe hybrid. We have trillions of bacteria living inside us. One commentator went as far as to say we are all bacterias, a provocative way of acknowledging that there are more bacterial cells and genes in our own body than there are human cells and genes, and most of those bacteria live in our gut. All animals and plants appear to establish these symbiotic relationships with microorganisms, and in us, our gut flora can be considered like a forgotten organ. Health-promoting effects of good bacteria include boosting our immune system, improving digestion and absorption. They make vitamins, inhibit the growth of potential pathogens, and keep us from feeling bloated. But should bad bacteria take roost, they can produce carcinogens, putrefy protein in our gut, produce toxins, mess up our bowel function, and cause infections. Researchers are still in the process of figuring out which bacteria are which. There are more than 1,000 different types of bacteria that take up residence in the human colon. Just to give you a sense of the complexity, let me show you a diagram from a typical study of gut flora. This happens to be the largest such study done on the elderly, showing the frailest older folks tend to harbor similar bugs, suggesting further it may be the lousy diet in nursing homes that's causing the shift, which may play a role in ill health as we grow older, as you can clearly see in Figure 4. I mean, duh. Thankfully, not all microbiome diagrams are that complex. Based on studying what comes out of twins, those that eat different habitual diets, and stools from around the world, it has become evident that diet has a dominant role on the bacteria in our colon, and the diet-driven changes in it occur within days to weeks. Change our diet, change our gut flora. The hope of impacting health through diet may be one of the oldest concepts in medicine. However, only in recent years has our understanding of human physiology grown to a point where we can begin to understand how individual dietary components affect specific illnesses through our gut bacteria. Milk fat on that piece of pizza, for example, may complex with bile and feed a bacteria that produces the rotten egg gas hydrogen sulfide, and has experimentally been associated with colitis, inflammatory bowel disease. Fiber, on the other hand, feeds our good bacteria and decreases inflammation in the colon. Choline, found in eggs, seafood, and poultry, as well as carnitine in red meat, can be turned into trimethylamine oxide and contribute to heart disease and perhaps fatty liver disease. And excess iron may muck with our good bacteria and contribute to inflammation as well. The good news is that specific dietary interventions offer exciting potential for non-toxic, physiologic ways to alter gut microbiology and metabolism to benefit the natural course of many intestinal and systemic disorders. The total surface area of our gut is maybe 3,000 square feet, counting all the little folds, larger than a tennis court. Yet only a single layer of cells separates our inner core from the outer chaos. The primary fuel that keeps this critical cell layer alive is a short-chain fatty acid called butyrate, which our good bacteria make from the fiber we eat. we feed the good bacteria in our gut, and they feed us right back. They take the prebiotics we eat like fiber, and in return provide the vital fuel source that feeds the cells that line our colon, a prototypical example of the kind of symbiosis between us and our gut flora. How important are these compounds, our good bacteria derived from fiber? There's a condition known as diversion colitis that frequently develops in segments of the colon or rectum after surgical diversion of the fecal stream, meaning if you skip a segment of the bowel, like with an ileostomy, so that food no longer passes through that section, it becomes inflamed and can start bleeding, breaking down, closing off. How frequently does this happen? Up to 100% of the time. But the inflammation uniformly disappears after you reattach it to the fecal flow. We didn't know what caused it, maybe some kind of bacterial overgrowth or bad bacteria, or was it a nutritional deficiency of the lining of the colon due to the absence of the fiber needed to create the short-chain fatty acids? We didn't know until this study, where they cured the inflammation by bathing the lining in what it so desperately needed. Severe inflammation gone in just a few weeks. We feed the good bacteria in our gut, and they feed us right back. It makes sense that we have good bacteria in our gut that feed us, tries to keep us healthy. They got a pretty good thing going, right? It's warm and moist, and food just keeps magically coming down the pipe. But if we die, they lose out on all that. If we die, they die. So it's in their best evolutionary interest, right, to keep our colon happy. But there are bad bugs too, like cholera that cause diarrhea. They have a different strategy. The sicker they can make us, the more explosive the diarrhea, the better their chances of spreading to other people, into other colons. They don't care if we die, because they don't intend on going down with the ship. So how does the body keep the good bacteria around while getting rid of the bad? Think about it. We have literally trillions of bacteria in our gut, and so our immune system must constantly maintain a balance between tolerance to good bacteria while attacking bad bacteria. If we mess up this fine balance and start attacking harmless bacteria, it could lead to inflammatory bowel disease, where we're in constant red alert attack mode. The mechanisms by which the immune system maintains this critical balance remained largely undefined until now. If you think about it, there's got to be a way for our good bacteria to signal to our immune system that they're the good guys, and that signal is butyrate. Butyrate suppresses the inflammatory reaction, tells our immune system to stand down. So butyrate may behave as a microbial signal to inform our immune system that the relative levels of good bacteria are within the desired range. Right? Butyrate calms the immune system down, saying in effect, all's well, you got the good guys on board, ultimately rendering the intestinal immune system hypo-responsive, meaning kind of accommodating to the beneficial bacteria. But in the absence of the calming effect of butyrate, our immune system is back in full force, attacking the bacteria within our gut, because they're obviously not the right ones, since butyrate levels are so low. So we evolved to have butyrate suppress our immune reaction. So should our good bacteria ever get wiped out and bad bacteria take over, our immune system would be able to sense this and go on a rampage, and destroy the invaders and continue rampaging until there are only good bacteria, creating butyrate to put the immune system back to sleep. OK, here's the critical piece. Here's why this all matters. What if we don't eat enough fiber? Remember, our good bacteria use fiber to create butyrate. So if we don't eat enough fiber, then we can't make enough butyrate. We could have lots of good bacteria, but if we don't feed them fiber, they can't make butyrate. Sensing such low levels of butyrate, our body mistakenly thinks our gut must be filled with bad bacteria and reacts accordingly. Our body can mistake low fiber intake for having a population of bad bacteria in our gut. Our body doesn't know about processed food. It evolved over millions of years getting massive fiber intake. Even during the Paleolithic period, 100 grams of fiber a day. So on fiber-deficient Western diets, eating our Spam on Wonder Bread, right, when our body detects low butyrate levels in the gut, it doesn't think low fiber. As far as our body's concerned, there's no such thing as low fiber. It thinks bad bacteria. because for millions of years low butyrate means bad bacteria. So that's the signal for our body to go on the inflammatory offensive. So that's one reason why fiber can be so anti-inflammatory. One of the reasons fiber intake is critical for optimal health. Not fiber supplements, but whole plant foods. Fiber supplementation with something like Metamucil may not replicate the results seen with a diet naturally high in fiber. In 1954, the tobacco industry paid to publish the frank statement to cigarette smokers in hundreds of U.S. newspapers. It stated that the public's health was the industry's concern above all else, and promised a variety of good faith changes. The frank statement was a charade, the first step in a concerted half-century-long campaign to mislead Americans about the catastrophic effects of smoking and to avoid public policy that might damage sales. What followed were decades of deceit and actions that cost millions of lives. In the hope that the food industry history will be written differently, these researchers highlighted important lessons that can be learned from the tobacco experience. The processed food industries use tactics similar to those by tobacco companies to undermine public health interventions. They do this by distorting research findings, co-opting policymakers and health professionals, and lobbying politicians and public officials. In his book about his fight with the tobacco industry, former FDA Commissioner David Kessler recounted similar strong-arm tactics used by the meat industry to try to squash nutrition regulations. The Supreme Court's Citizens United decision, allowing corporations to spend unlimited amounts on political ads during election campaigns, could make things even worse by working against candidates who support public health positions. Another similarity between tobacco and food companies is the introduction and heavy marketing of quote-unquote safer or healthier products. When cigarette sales dropped due to health concerns, the industry introduced safer, filtered cigarettes that gave health-conscious smokers an alternative to quitting, and sales shot back up. Ironically, the filters originally had asbestos in them. Less nicotine, less tar, and now with reduced carcinogens. This is an actual ad. And how could anything be bad for you if it's 100% organic? Sound familiar? Today, we have leaner pork, or eggs with less cholesterol, maybe the food industry's kind of low-tar cigarettes. A KFC ad campaign depicted an African-American family in which the father was told by the mother that KFC has 0 grams of trans fat now. The father, in the presence of children, shouts, "Yeah, but woohoo!" and then begins eating the fried chicken by the bucketful. Or cereal companies touting all the whole grains in their Cocoa Puffs Brownie Crunch. Fruit Loops now provides fiber. A U.S. district judge overseeing a tobacco industry case put it well. All too often, in the choice between the physical health of consumers and the financial well-being of business, concealment is chosen over disclosure, sales over safety, and money over morality. Who are these persons who knowingly and secretly decide to put the buying public at risk solely for the purpose of making profits? And who believe that illness and death of consumers is an apparent cost of their own prosperity? Above all, the experience of tobacco shows how powerful profits can be as a motivator, even at the cost of millions of lives and unspeakable suffering. Medicine is messy. One of the reasons researchers experiment on animals is that they can create uniform, standardized injuries to test potential remedies. It's not like you can just cut open 50 people and see if something works better than a sugar pill. But wait a second, we cut people open all the time. It's called surgery. The efficacy of turmeric curcumin in pain and postoperative fatigue after laparoscopic cholecystectomy, people getting their gallbladder removed. A double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled study. 50 people were cut into, given curcumin or an identical-looking placebo, along with rescue analgesics, actual painkillers to take if the pain becomes unbearable. Even though it's just laparoscopic surgery, people don't realize what a toll it can take. You can be out of commission for a month. In India, turmeric in curry powder has traditionally been used as a remedy for traumatic pain and fatigue, so let's put it to the test. In the weeks following surgery, a dramatic drop in pain and fatigue scores in the turmeric pigment group, the curcumin group. Those are my kind of p-values. It's hard to come up with objective measures of pain and fatigue, but drug-wise, the curcumin group was still in so much pain they were forced to take 7 of the rescue painkillers. In the same time period, though, the control group had to take 39. Of course, better to not get gallstones in the first place, but their conclusion was like no other I've ever read in a drug trial. Turmeric as a natural food ingredient, palatable and harmless. OK, so far so good. It proves to be beneficial, as it may be an eco-friendly alternative to synthesized anti-inflammatory drugs which have a definite carbon footprint due to industrial production? Since when do surgeons care about the greenhouse gas emissions from drug companies? I just had to look up this reference. And there it is, the journey of the carbon-literate and climate-conscious endosurgeon. I don't know what's stranger, seeing the word holistic in a surgical journal, or the name of this guy's practice, Dr. Agarwal's Surgery and Yoga. How many years of life are lost to potentially preventable cancers? Every year, more than 5 million expected years of life are lost to lung cancer, breast cancer, and colorectal cancer alone. Therefore, identifying and improving strategies for prevention of cancer remains a priority, especially since not more than 2% of all human cancer is attributable to purely genetic factors. The rest involve external factors, such as our diet. The most comprehensive summary of evidence on diet and cancer ever compiled recommends we should eat mostly foods of plant origin to help prevent cancer. This means centering one's diet around plant foods, not just whole grains and beans every day, but every meal. And when it comes to foods that may increase cancer risk, they were similarly bold, unlike many other dietary guidelines that just wimp out and just advise people to moderate their intake of bad foods, like eat less candy. The cancer guidelines didn't mince words when it came to the worst of the worst. For example, don't just minimize soda intake, avoid it. Don't just cut back on bacon, ham, hot dog, sausage, and lunch meats, but avoid processed meats, period, because data do not show any level of intake that can confidently be shown not to be associated with risk. Processed meat can not only be thought of as a powerful multi-organ carcinogen, but may increase the risk of heart disease and diabetes. Red meat was bad, but processed meat was worse, and that included white meat, like chicken, turkey slices. So with more heart disease, cancer, and diabetes, it's no surprise processed meat consumption has been associated with increased risk of death. In Europe, they calculated that reduction of processed meat consumption to less than a quarter of a hot dog's worth a day would prevent more than 3% of all deaths. This was the second largest prospective study ever done on diet and cancer, studying more than 400,000 people. The largest ever, though, 600,000, was done here in the U.S., the AARP study. They found the preventable fraction to be even higher, suggesting, for example, that 20% of heart disease deaths among women could be averted if the highest consumers cut down to like less than a half strip of bacon's worth a day. Syncope, otherwise known as fainting, is the sudden brief loss of consciousness caused by diminished blood flow to our brain that occurs at least once in about 1 in 5 people, and about 1 in 10 may happen over and over, responsible for millions of emergency room visits and hospitalizations. Though sometimes fainting can be caused by heart problems, most often it's triggered just by standing, because blood pools in our legs, or strong emotions, and are called vasovagal reactions. Under certain circumstances, such as blood donation, syncope has important medical and societal significance. More than 150,000 people experience fainting spells or near fainting spells each year when they're giving blood, so it'd be good to find a way to avoid it. But if you think that has medical and societal significance, what about fainting when you're driving? It goes without saying that losing consciousness while driving can pose a serious threat to the patient and society. Of a group of folks getting tested for it, 9% report that they had lost consciousness while driving. When it happens over and over, drugs and surgery are used, installing a pacemaker, but such therapy is expensive, efficacy is questionable, and adverse effects are common. In fact, results of most drug treatment trials have been disappointing, and the value of implanting pacemakers has been repeatedly questioned, and now there's evidence for their lack of effectiveness. So what do we do? Well, in Italy, evidently the older generation of general practitioners advised patients prone to fainting carry a wooden egg, used in the old days for darning socks, and to apply muscle tension by gripping the wooden egg forcefully as soon as a faint was imminent. These folklore stories inspired an Italian cardiologist to apply arm muscle tensing to combat vasovagal fainting, but it wasn't put to the test until now. About a minute before losing consciousness, most about to faint experience so-called prodromal symptoms. They feel dizzy, queasy, or break out in a sweat, signaling they're just about to black out. When that happens, there are a number of maneuvers shown to successfully abort the impending episode. One is called isometric arm counterpressure, where you grip one hand in the other and exert pressure trying to pull your arms apart, and you keep it up until the symptoms go away. How successful is it? Patients were shown how to do it and reported it was successful 99% of the time, safe and effective, proposed to be the new first-line treatment for those who start to feel faint. Leg crossing and muscle tensing has also been shown to work, where you cross your legs, squeezing them together as you tense your leg, stomach, and butt muscles. Safe, inexpensive, effective. They propose having patients try this before having a cardiac pacemaker surgically implanted. Squatting down is another maneuver if all else fails. Is there anything we can do to prevent the symptoms in the first place? Do we have to wait until we're all dizzy, clammy, and sweaty, and nauseous? Well, speaking of cheap, safe, and effective, just drinking water can prevent it. So if you know needles make you woozy, 5 minutes before you get stuck, chug down 2 cups of water, which can dramatically bring pressures up within minutes in people who are predisposed to fainting, and have similar effects in normal, healthy adults. The fact that water exerts such profound effects can be exploited by blood donation programs, for example, to help prevent people from fainting. It's also the currently recommended treatment for so-called blood injury or injection phobia, which is actually pretty common, affecting about 1 in 25 people, 75% of which report a history of fainting in response. The problem is not just that they won't donate blood. Avoiding anything related to blood injury or injections could pose a particularly serious threat if people neglect to seek medical care when necessary. But all one may have to do is just preload with 2 cups of water. The knowledge that such simple self-help maneuvers are readily available and could be life-saving should prove valuable and helpful in everyday life. In 12 short years, government panels have gone from suggesting widespread calcium supplementation may be necessary to protect our bones to do not supplement. What happened? It all started with a 2008 study in New Zealand. Short-term studies had shown that calcium supplementation may drop blood pressures by about a point, though the effect appears transient, disappearing after a few months, but better than nothing. And excess calcium in the gut can cause fat malabsorption by forming soap fat, reducing saturated fat absorption and increasing fecal saturated fat content. And indeed, if you take a couple Tums along with your half bucket of KFC, up to twice as much fat could end up in your stool, and with less saturated fat absorbed into your system, your cholesterol might drop. So the New Zealand researchers were expecting to lower heart attack rates by giving women calcium supplements. To their surprise, there appeared to be more heart attacks in the calcium supplement group. Was this just a fluke? All eyes turned to the Women's Health Initiative, the largest and longest randomized controlled trial of calcium supplementation. The name might sound familiar. That's the study that uncovered how dangerous hormone replacement therapy was. Would it do the same for calcium supplements? The Women's Health Initiative reported no adverse effects. However, the majority of participants were already taking calcium supplements before the study started. So effectively, the study was just comparing higher versus lower dose calcium supplementation, not calcium supplements versus no calcium supplements. What if you go back and just see what happened to the women who started out not taking supplements, and then were randomized to the supplement group? Those who started calcium supplements suffered significantly more heart attacks or strokes. Thus, high dose or low dose, any calcium supplementation seems to increase cardiovascular disease risk. So researchers went back digging through other trial data for heart attack and stroke rates in women randomized to calcium supplements with or without vitamin D added, and confirmed the danger. And most of the population studies agreed. Users of calcium supplements tended to have increased rates of heart disease, stroke, and death. The supplement industry was not happy, accusing the researchers of relying in part on self-reported data, like they just asked people if they had a heart attack or not, rather than verifying it. And indeed, long-term calcium supplementation causes all sorts of gastrointestinal distress, including twice the risk of being hospitalized with acute symptoms that may have been confused with a heart attack. But no, the increased risk was seen consistently across the trials, whether the heart attacks were verified or not. OK, but why do calcium supplements increase heart attack risk, but not calcium you get in your diet? Perhaps because when you take calcium pills, you get a spike of calcium in your bloodstream that you don't get just eating calcium-rich foods. Within hours of taking supplemental calcium, the calcium levels in the blood shoot up and can stay up as long as 8 hours. This evidently produces what's called a hypercoagulable state. Your blood clots more easily, which could increase the risk of clots in the heart and brain. And indeed, higher calcium blood levels are tied to higher heart attack and stroke rates, so the mechanism may be calcium supplements leading to unnaturally large, rapid, and sustained calcium levels in the blood, which can have a variety of potentially problematic effects. Calcium supplements have been widely embraced on the grounds that they are a natural and therefore safe way of preventing osteoporotic fractures. But it's now becoming clear that taking calcium in 1 or 2 daily doses is not natural, and that it does not reproduce the same metabolic effects as calcium in food, the way nature intended. And furthermore, the evidence is also becoming steadily stronger that calcium supplementation may not be safe. That's why most organizations providing advice regarding bone health now recommend that individuals should obtain their calcium requirement from diet in preference to supplements. But if we can't reach it through diet alone, would the benefits to the bones outweigh the risks to the heart? There has been an assumption for decades that as a natural element, calcium supplements must intrinsically be safe. But calcium supplementation is neither natural nor risk-free, but the same could be said for every medication on the planet. Yet doctors continue to write billions of prescriptions for drugs every year, because the hope, at least, is that the benefits outweigh the risks. So what about the benefits of calcium supplements? Yes, heart attacks and strokes can be devastating, but so can hip fractures. The risk of dying shoots up in the months following a hip fracture. About 1 in 5 women don't last a year after a hip fracture, and it may be even worse for men. On average, apparently cutting one's lifespan short by 4 or 5 years. And unfortunately, these dismal statistics don't seem to be getting much better. So even if calcium supplements caused a few heart attacks and strokes, if they prevented many more hip fractures, then it might result in a favorable risk-benefit ratio. So how effective are calcium supplements in preventing hip fractures? We've known that milk intake doesn't appear to help, but maybe that's because any potential benefit of the calcium in milk may be overshadowed by the increased risk of fracture and death associated with the galactose sugar in milk. But what about just the calcium in a calcium supplement alone? Calcium intake in general does not seem to be related to hip fracture risk at all. And when people have been given calcium supplements, not only was there no reduction in hip fracture risk, an increased risk is possible. The randomized controlled trial suggests a 64% greater risk of hip fractures with calcium supplementation compared to just like getting a placebo sugar pill. Where did they even get this idea, then, that calcium supplements might help our bones? It was this influential study in 1992 that found a combination of vitamin D and calcium supplements could reduce hip fracture rates 43%. But this was done on institutionalized women, like in a nursing home, who were vitamin D deficient. They weren't getting sufficient sun exposure, and so if you're vitamin D deficient and you take vitamin D and calcium, no surprise, your bones get better. But for women living independently, out in the community, the latest official recommendations for calcium and vitamin D supplementation to prevent osteoporosis is unambiguous: do not supplement. Why? Because in the absence of compelling evidence for benefit, taking supplements is not worth any risk, no matter how small. Now, this is not to say these supplements don't play a role in treating osteoporosis, or that vitamin D supplements might not be good for other things, but if you're just trying to prevent fractures, women living outside of institutions should not take them, and perhaps even in institutions. In this study, instead of giving nursing home residents vitamin D and calcium supplements, they randomized them to sunlight exposure and calcium supplements, and those that got the calcium pills had significantly increased mortality, lived shorter lives than the sunshine-only group. Although calcium supplements don't appear to prevent hip fractures, they may reduce overall fracture risk by like 10%. So here's how the risk-benefit shakes out. If 1,000 people took calcium supplements for 5 years, we would expect 14 excess heart attacks, meaning 14 people would have a heart attack that they would not have had if they had not started the calcium supplements. So they were effectively going to the store and buying something that gave them a heart attack, plus 10 strokes that otherwise would not have happened, and 13 deaths. People would have been alive had they not started the supplements. But that's all balanced against the 26 fractures that would be prevented. Now, it's no fun falling down, breaking your wrist or something, but I think most people would look at that risk-benefit analysis and conclude that calcium supplements are doing more harm than good. Given these findings, the use of these supplements should be discouraged, and individuals advised to obtain calcium from their diet instead. Calcium supplements have been associated with elevated risk of myocardial infarction, heart attacks, whereas dietary calcium intake has not. How much calcium should we shoot for? Interestingly, unlike most other nutrients, there's no international consensus. For example, in the UK, the recommendation for adults is 700 mg a day. But across the pond in the US, it's up to 1,200 a day. Whenever I see that kind of huge discrepancy between government panels, I immediately think scientific uncertainty, political maneuverings, or both. Newer data, based on calcium balance studies, in which researchers make detailed measurements of the calcium going in and out of people, suggests that the calcium requirements for men and women is lower than previously estimated. They found calcium balance was highly resistant to change across a broad range of intakes, meaning our body is not stupid. If we eat less calcium, our body absorbs more and excretes less, and if we eat more calcium, we absorb less and excrete more to stay in balance. Therefore, current evidence suggests that dietary calcium intake is not something most people need to worry about. This may explain why in most studies no relationship was found between calcium intake and bone loss anywhere in the skeleton, because the body just kind of takes care of it. Don't push it too far, though. I mean, once you get down to just a few hundred milligrams a day, you may significantly get more bone loss. Though there may not be great evidence to support the US recommendations, the UK may have the right idea, shooting for between 500 and 1,000 milligrams a day from dietary sources, unless you've had gastric bypass surgery or something and need to take supplements. For most people, though, calcium supplements cannot be considered safe or effective for preventing bone fractures. Depression affects more than 150 million people worldwide, making it a leading cause of losing healthy years of life as a result of disability. In fact, by 2020, depression may be the second leading cause of healthy years of life lost, second only to heart disease. Why is depression so common? Well, it is said nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. But why would we evolve to get depressed? Depression poses a baffling evolutionary puzzle, if it has such negative effects, but yet it remains so common and heritable, meaning a big chunk of risk is passed through our genes. So there must be some kind of adaptive benefit. Otherwise, presumably, it would have been naturally selected against. Maybe depression is an evolutionary strategy for defense against infection. Infection has been the leading cause of mortality throughout human history. The average life expectancy was 25, and it was not uncommon for half our kids to die. With such stark capabilities, infection has been a critical and potent driving force in natural selection. When we become infected, there's a surge of inflammation as our body mounts a counterattack. And then what happens? We feel lousy. We feel sick, we get weak, tired, slow, and sleepy. We don't want to see anyone, we don't want to do anything. All we want to do is sleep. It's like we're depressed. And that's great for fighting infection. Not only does it help us conserve energy so we can put up a good fight, but reduces social contact. We're not running around infecting everyone. It's the same reason we evolved to think poop doesn't smell good, or decaying flesh. That keeps us safe from infection. In fact, we see this phenomenon with other social animals like honeybees and mole rats, who feel impelled to crawl off and die alone when they get sick, which reduces the risk for the rest of the community. The relationship between mental health and inflammation was first noted in 1887, for which the only psychiatrist ever win the award got a Nobel Prize. But what evidence have we accumulated in the centuries since that inflammation causes depression? Well, people who are depressed have raised inflammatory markers such as C-reactive protein. Inflammatory illnesses are associated with greater rates of major depression. Indeed, that's what's found in a variety of inflammatory conditions, including more kind of benign inflammatory conditions like asthma and allergies. And that's important, suggesting the mood symptoms are not simply feeling bad about having a terrible disease, but may be directly tied to the inflammation. And most powerfully, you can actually induce depression by inducing inflammation. Like when we give interferon for certain cancers or chronic infections, up to 50% go on to suffer major depression. Even just giving a vaccine can cause enough inflammation to trigger depressive symptoms. Taken together, these studies are strongly suggestive of inflammation being a causative factor of mood symptoms. So, can an anti-inflammatory diet help prevent depression? We didn't know until about 43,000 women without depression were followed, along with their diets, for about a dozen years to see who became depressed. And it was those who ate a more inflammatory diet pattern, characterized by more soda, refined grains, and meat, suggesting that chronic inflammation may underlie the association between diet and depression. Normally, we think of omega-3s as anti-inflammatory, but they found fish to be pro-inflammatory, associated with increased C-reactive protein levels, consistent with recent findings that omega-3s don't seem to help with either depression or inflammation. The most anti-inflammatory diet is plant-based, which can cut C-reactive protein levels by 30% within 2 weeks, perhaps because of the anti-inflammatory properties of antioxidants. I've talked about this before, but never really explained why antioxidants are anti-inflammatory. See, oxidative damage caused by free radicals may cause an autoimmune response in the body by changing the chemical structure of otherwise ubiquitous molecules to generate new structures that the body attacks as foreign. For example, when LDL cholesterol gets oxidized, our body creates antibodies against it and attacks it. And so clinical depression can be accompanied by increased oxidative stress and the autoimmune inflammatory response it creates. Free radicals lead to autoimmune inflammation. Where else does inflammation come from in our diet? Endotoxins. Right? It's worth reviewing how the endotoxins in animal products can cause a burst of inflammation within hours of consumption. What does it do to our mood? If you inject endotoxin into people, within a few hours, inflammation shoots up, and so does feelings of depression, as well as feelings of social disconnection between people. Although previous research has demonstrated that inflammatory activity contributes to depressive symptoms, no work in humans has examined the effect of experimentally induced inflammation on anhedonia, the lack of reaction to pleasurable stimuli. This is an important symptom of depression. No work has been done, that is, until now. Within hours of endotoxin hitting their bloodstream, these experimental subjects not only started to feel depressed, but they had significant reductions in activity in the reward center of their brain. They were less excited about winning money playing video games, for example, in this study. But by eliminating animal products and eating antioxidant-rich diets, we may be able to prevent or treat depression. Peppermint was not officially described by a white guy until 1696, but we've probably been using it for at least a few thousand years. After-dinner mints are used to reduce the gastric colic reflex, the urge to defecate following a meal. The stretching of nerves in the stomach triggers spasms in the colon, which makes sense. Our body's making way for more food coming down the pike. What peppermint does is relax the muscles of the colon. If you take circular strips of human colons removed during surgery and just lay them on a table, they spontaneously contract on their own about 3 times a minute. Isn't that kind of creepy? But then if you drip more and more menthol from peppermint on them, the contractions still happen, but they're not as strong. Well, if peppermint can relax the colon and reduce spasms, might it be useful during a colonoscopy, as first suggested over 30 years ago? See, colon spasm can hinder the progress of the scope and cause patient discomfort. So they tried spraying some peppermint oil off the tip, and in every case, the spasm was relieved within 30 seconds. 30 seconds is a long time, though, when you have this snaking inside of you. So the next innovation would be to just use a hand pump to flood the whole colon with a peppermint oil solution before the colonoscopy, a simple, safe, and convenient alternative to injecting an antispasm drug, which can have an array of side effects, whereas instilling some peppermint solution dyed blue in this picture here, and within 20 seconds the spasming colon opened right up. Similar results were obtained with upper endoscopy, working better, quicker, and safer than the drug, and also when mixed into barium enemas. But wouldn't it be easier just to swallow some peppermint oil instead of squirting it up the rectum? Pre-medication with peppermint oil in colonoscopy. Just popping a few peppermint oil capsules 4 hours before the procedure sped up the entire process and increased both doctor and patient satisfaction, because reducing colon spasm reduces pain and discomfort and makes the scope easier to insert and withdraw. Pain and discomfort are not the only barriers to signing people up for colonoscopies, though. I mean, even if peppermint oil makes it go seamless, there's still the dreaded bowel prep, where you have to drink quarts of a powerful liquid laxative before the procedure to completely clean you out. And aside from the pain, there's often a fear of complications and feelings of embarrassment and vulnerability. Serious complications occur in about 1 in every 350 colonoscopies, including perforations and bleeding to death. Perforations occur when the tip of the scope punches through the wall of the colon, or because they inflate the colon too much, they have to pump air in so they can look around, or when they're trying to cauterize some bleeding caused by like a biopsy, which in extremely rare circumstances can ignite some residual gas and cause the colon to explode on the table. Death from colonoscopy is rare, occurring only in about 1 in every 1,000 procedures. But with about 15 million colonoscopies performed annually in the United States, colonoscopies kill thousands of Americans every year, raising the question, do the benefits outweigh the risks? Though colonoscopies can cause serious harm in about 1 out of every 350 cases, sigmoidoscopies, which are shorter and smaller scopes, have 10 times fewer complications. But do colonoscopies work better, the total risk-benefit better? We don't know, since we don't have any randomized controlled colonoscopy trials, and we won't until the mid-2020s. So what should we do in the meanwhile? The USPSTF, the official prevention guidelines body, considers colonoscopies just one of 3 acceptable colon cancer screening strategies. Starting at age 50, we should either get our stool tested for hidden blood every year, no scoping at all, or a sigmoidoscopy every 5 years, along with stool testing every 3, or a colonoscopy every 10 years. And in terms of virtual colonoscopies or the new DNA stool testing, there's insufficient evidence to recommend either of those two. Though they recommend ending routine screening at age 75, that's assuming you've been testing negative for 25 years since your 50th birthday. If you're 75 and you've never been screened, it's probably a good idea at least into one's 80s. If there are 3 acceptable screening strategies, how should one decide? They recommend that patients work with their physician in selecting one after considering the risks and benefits of each option. For patients to participate in the decision-making process, though, they have to be given the information. The degree to which health providers communicate the necessary information was not known until this study was published. They audio-taped clinic visits, looking for the 9 elements of informed decision-making, discussing the patient's role in making the decision. What kind of decision has to be made? What are the alternatives? What are the pros and cons of each option? The uncertainties, making sure the patient understands their options, then finally ask them what would they prefer. That's the role of a good doctor. It's your body, it's your informed decision. How many of these 9 crucial elements of informed decision-making were communicated to patients when it came to colon cancer screening? Care to hazard a guess? In most of the patients, none. The average number addressed? 1 out of 9. As an editorial in the Journal of the American Medical Association put it, there are too many probabilities and uncertainties for patients to consider, and too little time for clinicians to discuss them with patients. So doctors just end up making the patient's mind up for them. And what do they choose? Most often, as in this survey of 1,000 physicians, doctors recommend colonoscopy. Why? Other developed countries mostly use the stool test, the FOBT test, with only a few recommending colonoscopies or sigmoidoscopies. This may be because most physicians in the world don't get paid by procedure. As one U.S. gastroenterologist put it, colonoscopy is the goose that laid the golden egg. A New York Times expose concluded that the reason doctors rake in so much money is less about top-notch patient care, more about business plans maximizing revenue and lobbying, marketing, and turf battles. Who sets the prices for procedures? The American Medical Association, the chief lobbying group for physicians. They set the prices. No wonder gastroenterologists pull in nearly $500,000 a year. And the American Gastroenterological Association wants to keep it that way. Referring to these exposés, the president of the association warned that gastroenterology is under attack. Colorectal cancer screening and prevention may be reduced in volume and discounted, but they have tips for how to succeed in the coming nightmarish world of accountability and transparency. Why would primary care docs push colonoscopies, though? Because many doctors get what are essentially financial kickbacks for procedure referrals. studying doctor behavior before and after they started profiting from their own referrals. It's estimated that doctors make nearly 1 million more referrals every year than they would have if they were not personally profiting. I've talked about the role meat may play in increasing the risk of diabetes, and the potential protective role of healthy plant foods. But plant-based diets not only appear to guard against getting diabetes in the first place, they may successfully treat the disease better than diabetic diets patients are typically placed on, controlling weight and cholesterol. Diets based on whole plant foods can result in significant weight loss without any limits on portion size or calorie counting, because plant foods tend to be so calorically dilute. Here's 100 calories of broccoli, tomato, and strawberries. Compare that to 100 calories of chicken, cheese, or fish. People just can't seem to eat enough to compensate for the calorie deficit, so lose weight eating whole plant foods. And most importantly, it works. Better. Plant-based diet beat out the conventional American Diabetes Association diet in a head-to-head randomized controlled clinical trial without restricting portions, no calorie or carb counting. A review of all such studies found that individuals following plant-based diets experience improved reductions in blood sugars, body weight, and cardiovascular risk compared with those following diets that included animal products. And cardiovascular risk is what kills diabetics the most. I'm more likely to get strokes, more likely heart failure. In fact, diabetes has been proposed as a coronary heart disease risk equivalent, meaning diabetic patients without a history of coronary disease have an equivalent risk to those non-diabetic individuals with confirmed heart disease. A newer study used a technique to actually measure insulin sensitivity. It proved on both diets in the first 3 months, but then the veg diet pulled ahead. And look at their LDL cholesterol. That's what we see when people are put on a plant-based diet. Cholesterol comes down so much, it can actually reverse the atherosclerosis progression, reverse the progression of heart disease. We know about the beneficial effect of vegetarian diets on controlling weight, blood sugars, cholesterol, insulin sensitivity, and oxidative stress compared to conventional diabetic diets. But what about quality of life, mood? How did people feel after making such a dramatic change in their diets? In this randomized controlled trial, study subjects were assigned either to a plant-based diet group or control group. Vegetables, grains, beans, fruits, and nuts, with animal products limited to a maximum of 1 daily portion of low-fat yogurt. And the control group got the official diabetes diet. Quality of life improved on both diets in the first few months, but within 6 months, the plant-based group clearly pulled ahead. Same thing with depression scores. Dropped in both groups in the first 3 months, but started to rebound in the control group. Bottom line, the more plant-based diet led to a greater improvement in quality of life and mood. Patients consuming a vegetarian diet also felt less constrained than those consuming the conventional diet. People actually felt the conventional diabetic diet was more restrictive than the plant-based diet. Disinhibition decreased with the vegetarian diet, meaning those eating vegetarian were less likely to binge, and the veg group folks tended to feel less hungry, all of which helps with sustainability in the long term, which is, of course, critical for changing diet. So not only do plant-based diets appear to work better, but they may be easier to stick to. And with the improvement in mood, patients may exhibit desired improvements not only in physical, but also in mental health. This is the famous study that started so many down the wrong track. Thousands of men followed for 19 years, and there was a stepwise drop in the risk of lung cancer for smokers that got more and more beta-carotene in their diet, which they just estimated by adding up how much fruit, vegetables, and soup they ate. So did they start treating smokers with fruit, veggies, and soup? No, they gave them beta-carotene pills. And those taking the pills got more lung cancer than those that didn't, and more deaths from lung cancer, heart disease, and stroke, and a shorter average lifespan overall. Didn't stop them from trying it over and over again, though 6 more studies performed in beta-carotene pills continued to increase mortality. 20 other studies in which they gave beta-carotene and other antioxidant supplements significantly increased mortality. An obvious conclusion is that isolated nutrients are drugs, but not studied or regulated as drugs, and perhaps they should be. Food, on the other hand, needs to be treated in a different way, cognizant of the food synergy concept. The whole food is greater than the sum of its parts. Yes, low beta-carotene levels in the blood increase the risk of heart disease mortality, but that's basically just saying low carrot, pumpkin, collard greens, and kale intake increases the risk of heart disease mortality. Or here in the US, having a carrot, spinach, and sweet potato deficiency. Yes, the more carotenoids we have in our blood, the healthier we may be, but though unscrupulous marketers may use this to sell dietary supplements, responsible scientists and food producers need to emphasize the use of foods and whole food products to improve blood carotenoid concentrations. We can now see that giving supplements of beta-carotene was a misguided way to prevent cancer. Instead, researchers maybe should have sought to determine which foods worked best, and then put fruits and veggies to the test in randomized controlled trials. Science tends to be reductionist, looking for discrete causes and effects. It's hard to get food studies past peer grant reviewers unless they take the food apart, which seems to us to miss the point. The key is to encourage consumers to increase the total amount to 9 to 13 servings of fruits and vegetables every day. The past 30 years has seen the development of an enormous body of evidence on the importance of plant-based foods in preventing or reducing the risk of chronic disease. But despite broadly disseminated public information programs on how to eat healthily, it is extremely difficult to get people to change their diets. Therefore, one proposed solution is to add back the health-promoting phytonutrients that are missing from many convenience foods. By adding more fruits and vegetables? No, silly, by genetically engineering phytonutrients into fast food. People eat ketchup, not kale, so who needs greens when you can genetically engineer high-folate tomatoes? Why buy berries when you can make tomatoes purple by stitching in 2 genes from snapdragons to make transgenic tomatoes? Instead of soybean burgers, we can have soybean genes in the ketchup on our burgers. And you've heard of grape tomatoes? How about really grape tomatoes? Pills are more profitable than plants, but when pills don't work, industry will try patenting the produce itself. The longtime editor of a prestigious medical journal started his editorial on physician conflicts of interest describing a fantasy that doctors treat patients using simply the best evidence and experience, rather than being influenced by money or self-interest. This is, of course, nonsense. There's a reason pharmaceutical companies spend billions of dollars on the influencing, education, and entertainment of doctors around the world. The vast majority of physicians in the United States take gifts from the pharmaceutical industry, and ironically, cardiologists, whose practice centers around diseases that can be largely prevented and treated with lifestyle changes, receive the most payments of all. A previous compilation of surveys from the 80s and 90s found that on average doctors met with drug industry representatives face-to-face about once a week. Today, your family doctor may meet with drug company employees on average 16 times a month. Wait a second, there's only 20 work days a month, so that's nearly every day. What does the public think about this? Only about half even appear to know what's going on. So if 83% of doctors receive gifts, it's likely that a significant percentage of patients are not aware that their personal physician receives industry gifts. And we're not just talking like a Viagra paperweight or soap dispenser. For marketing, pharmaceutical companies spend $15,000 per physician every year, making conflicts of interest one of the most pressing problems in American healthcare. How do doctors feel about it? Most generally approve of the gifts. However, tellingly, physicians do not want gift relationships made public. Physicians disagree that it's inappropriate to accept gifts, but their reluctance to disclose this gift relationship to the public suggests that they must recognize that the public would not appreciate the practice. To analyze how physicians resolve this contradiction, researchers conducted a series of physician focus groups. It turns out physicians use a variety of denials and rationalizations. They avoided thinking about it, denied responsibility. Physicians readily acknowledged the inherent conflict of interest, but this didn't stop them. In fact, some complained that the gifts were getting more modest. Us doctors tend to deny that we personally have any conflict of interest. If a pharmaceutical company buys us a nice dinner, for example, we tend to insist that it won't affect our judgment in any way, as if drug companies just like wasting money on purpose. Most physicians contend that their colleagues are susceptible to industry's influence, but not them. Though physicians don't want these gift relationships to be public, that's just too bad, because thanks to Republican Senator Chuck Grassley, the Sunshine Act was inserted into Obamacare. And so for the first time, patients will now be able to see what, if any, financial ties their own doctor has. Doctors can't hide anymore. This will give patients some insights when choosing a provider, and once the database goes live, law enforcement agencies can also see who's getting money from industry to investigate illegal kickback cases. Right now, it might just be embarrassing, but this could allow attorney generals to go after doctors to see the kinds of incentives they may be getting for writing lots of prescriptions. And the database is live right now. If you go to openpaymentsdata.cms.gov/search, or for a more user-friendly version, ProPublica's Dollars for Docs page, the drug industry spends billions trying to influence doctors, and for the first time, you can see if your physician, or any physician, has their hand out. Senator Grassley hoped that this would help save our nation money. It could reduce healthcare costs if patients view such doctors less trustworthy, or choose doctors less in bed with industry, or could change physician behavior, who may want to avoid financial relationships with companies to guard against this patient distrust, or becoming the target of an expose or investigation. Or they could just try to cover it up. This is from the American Academy of Family Physicians, advising physicians how to avoid getting burned by the Sunshine Act. For example, drug companies now have to report when they give doctors free meals valued at over $10. So should family physicians just stop accepting free food from drug companies? No way! You just have to give the drug sales reps the right head count, so the per-person meal cost dips below $10. The former longtime editor of the New England Journal of Medicine said it best. Although the spotlight has been on disclosing doctors' financial relationships with industry, the problem with conflicts of interest is not the lack of disclosure, but the existence of the conflict itself. Rather than just disclosing them, the best approach to financial conflicts is to have none.